There we go. And then share screen here. Come on. There we go. So, okay. So, okay. Yes. Good. So the blessing for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So it is good to see everyone after the new year. Let's see, somebody has come in. And we left off at this red S, and I'm only going to go back one paragraph to give us the context before we move on to the new subject, a slightly new subject with the red S. So again, we're in Tractate Avodah Zarah, the first chapter, dealing with our relations with non-Jews, and specifically this part of the chapter dealing with business relations with them. The idea being that you want to ensure that when you do business with a non-Jew, and specifically in this tractate, it's idolaters, okay, as opposed to any other non-Jew who doesn't worship idols. Okay, so there's different categories or a hierarchy of non-Jews. The worst non-Jew is an idolater. Then there are other non-Jews who might hate you, but they're not idolaters. And then there are non-Jews who are resident aliens. And then there are converts. So there are different gradations of non-Jews that the rabbis discuss and know about. This is dealing with the highest form of non-Jew, the pagan idolater, because the Torah specifically tells us to annihilate the indigenous idolaters who live in the land of Israel. Their practices pollute the Holy Land, and so we need to cleanse the Holy Land before settling it, so that the holy people of Israel can properly be associated and live in the Holy Land of Israel. Okay, so that's why the rabbis go on and on about it. As for some of us who are reading the Daf Yomi, who are part of the Talmud Daf Yomi cycle, we're in the midst of the tractate Nidarim about vows that seems to be an endless tractate, and but the rabbis talk about it because the Torah talks about vows. So if the Torah talks about it, then it has to be part of our tradition, and the rabbis need to deal with it. Just like the next tractate will be about the Nazirite vow, and there's another tractate on oaths. So all of that, because it's in the Torah, that's why it has to be discussed by the rabbis. Okay, so this is how we left off last time. Did I say the bracha for Torah study? Yes, I did. The Gemara elaborates. And the fact that the Baraita permits buying at a Gentile fair is not difficult. All right, so we were talking about whether you can buy things at a Gentile fair, knowing perhaps that the profits or the proceeds of the sale to the Gentile, the money that you pay the Gentile, might be going to idol worship. So why is it okay in the Baraita to allow buying something from a Gentile fair, as here, where Rabbi Natan prohibits buying items from a Gentile fair, he states his ruling with regard to one who buys from a merchant, as a tax is taken from him for the benefit of idol worship. Okay, so when it's prohibited to buy from a Gentile fair, it's because you're buying from an accredited merchant, and the merchant is giving part of the is under law having to give part of the proceeds as a tax, and the tax goes to the Gentile government, which would mean idol worship. Whereas there in the Baraita that permits buying items at the fair, it states its ruling with regard to one who buys from a homeowner that is a private individual where a tax is not taken from him. Right? So there could be some vendors at a fair that are merchants, they're registered with the government, and others who are taking advantage of the fair by just setting up their own private stall and hoping that maybe the government won't catch them and they can keep all the sales. Or, it's a matter of making out a check to cash to buy something or to pay a repairman, or your cleaning lady, as opposed to making it out to the person, him or herself. And if you pay to cash, there are different gradations of how you have to report that. Right? So I'm not suggesting, I'm not a tax advisor, but that's what I've heard, that if you are paid in cash, you don't necessarily have to report that. Yes, Ben, unmute yourself.
Okay, so I'm aware of another an idea that you're allowed to actually make a false vow to not pay a tax authority. The sense of tax collectors are allowed to make a false vow. Should I understand that then, specifically in the context of a government that would spend the money on idolatry?
Right. So what we had read before is that specifically the proceeds of this fair go to idolatry. It's not necessarily that taxes go to the Roman authority that would mean for that would be directed for idol worship. Apparently, the conversation in the paragraphs before this was this specific fair where the taxes directly are going to the observance of the holiday and the idol worship. Okay?
So it's fine if the money goes to general coffers and, down the
Yes.
line, but directly, this is where it's particularly a problem.
Right. It's about specifically benefiting idol worship. It's something else about benefiting government. So yes, that's right. So that's specifically this fair that was under discussion was the tax was going to idol worship. Rabbi? Yes, Michael.
I think I remember reading somewhere that in the old days, and it may have been medieval fairs, I don't know, but merchants would pay a fee in order to set up in the middle of the official fair, and then other people who wouldn't pay the fee were on the outskirts. And so you paid for location, and that's
yeah, that could be that too. Yes, it's a matter of location. Perhaps the authorities permitted the non-registered people to be on the outside. Maybe the idea being the closer to the center is the better quality stuff, or the certified stuff, right? You wonder about produce that you buy necessarily. You want or any kind of merchandise that you buy. Sometimes you want accredited merchandise, like electronic products. You want to make sure that they're certified by the appropriate authority and they've been tested so that it doesn't blow up your home, right? So perhaps there's some of that with this location too. Okay. So the red S where we left off. The Gemara returns to discuss the Baraita that cited the opinion of Rabbi Natan. The master said above, right, the master meaning the Rabbi Natan, that's who we're referring to here. Any animal that one bought there should be destroyed. That is, an animal that you buy at a Gentile fair should be destroyed. The Gemara asks, but isn't there a requirement to prevent suffering to animals? That is, Tsa'ar Ba'alei Chayim is the phrase in Hebrew, right? Why, if you're buying an animal, why, how can you be commanded to destroy it or harm it when we are also commanded not to cause pain to animals? The Gemara asks, right, Abaye said, although there is an enjoinder against causing suffering to a living creature, it is permitted when necessary, as the Merciful One states to Joshua, you shall destroy their horses. Okay, so now this is an interesting an interesting idea. First of all, the rabbis are, and the Torah, even before that, is ahead of its time when presenting to us the idea of tsar ba'alei chayim. That, in other words, in other contemporary societies to the Bible, to the rabbis, non-human life is considered just like plants or rocks. That anything on earth is for human consumption, and we don't have to worry about, this is what other societies are saying, you don't have to worry about the feelings of the animals. It's only if you own the animal that you want to take care of it so that to ensure optimal production value, right? So if you own a cow, a milking cow, you want to feed it and take care and maintain it properly so that you get optimal milk from the cow. And that would be the same for any other farm animal that you own. But otherwise, you have no feelings, no moral or ethical feelings in another society towards animals. Whereas the Torah and the rabbis are adding, no, animals are part of God's creation as well, and we should feel sorry for them. And we can't just wantonly destroy them. That's the whole idea of hunting animals for sport. That's not a Jewish idea because it's Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim. You're not getting anything out of it. And so, but however, the Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim is up against an animal that's used for idol worship purposes. Therefore, just as people who worship idols become polluted, so too the animals become polluted. And therefore, like from the book of Joshua, which the book of Joshua is all about, the beginning of the process of settling the land of Israel and ridding the land of idolatry, anything associated with idolatry, even animals, need to be destroyed. So we might remember that with the Haftarah for Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat before Purim. We have the section from the Torah about annihilating the Amalekites, and of course Haman is supposedly an Amalekite. And you have the Haftarah where King Saul is commanded to annihilate the Amalekites. As the first king of Israel to fulfill the commandment in the Torah, and he lets the animals stay alive. And Samuel says to him, the prophets, you did not fulfill the commandment. You're supposed to destroy the animals too, because they're idol, they're pagan as well. And so Saul was punished for that and not allowed. The dynasty of Saul began and ended with him because of that. So if an animal is involved in idol worship, then the commandment to avoid pain of animals does not apply. Okay. Yes, Bess. You're muted, Bess.
I know the space bar doesn't work. Why did you buy the animal to begin with if you knew you had to kill it?
Oh, well, so I think the Gemara is teaching us don't buy the animal to begin with. However, so there's going to be further discussion in chapter 2, because chapter 2 of Avodah Zarah, I'm studying now with my friend Ethan Seidel, and what things might be done to this animal too. Not just that it might be used for idol worship in some way, but it's also used for disgusting behaviors. Okay, so you get my drift with that, and so that's enough. So the Gemara has to teach us about things that pagans might do to their animals that we have to avoid. So I don't think, I think this is just theory, not practical. What are you going to do if you buy? Don't buy. This is the reason why you shouldn't buy. Okay, so the master said above, And what constitutes destroying the animal? One cuts the hooves of the animal from the knee and below. All right, so you're not necessarily destroying the animal, but for all intents and purposes, if you're cutting off their legs so that they can't walk, you're essentially destroying the animal, because how is it going to get food and whatnot? The Gemara raises a contradiction to this idea from a Baraita. One may neither consecrate objects nor dedicate items for sacred use, nor valuate an item's worth based on its appraisal, and dedicate its monetary worth to the temple treasury in the present time when the temple no longer exists. All right, so let's just stop there for a second. There's a whole idea of consecrating something to the temple, and the tractate of Daf Yomi about taking vows has an element of this, that you're saying this is konam to me, that you are you're saying that you're not going to use this because you're dedicating it for temple purposes. So the Gemara is teaching that since the temple doesn't exist, we can't consecrate things to the temple anymore. It's not, because the book of Leviticus says that you can. That's the idea when the Mishkan was standing, and later when the temple was standing. So the rabbis are saying, well, there's no temple, so we shouldn't be doing this anymore. We shouldn't be consecrating items to the for temple purposes. It could be part of standard practice of spiritual practice, or of understanding that not everything we own belongs to us. We will want to be reminded constantly of our gratitude to God, and part of being reminded of that could be dedicating something that we own to God by way of consecrating it for temple purposes. So the rabbis are saying, but we know we can't do this. And if one did not consecrate or dedicate or evaluate items for sacred use, the presence of these items might lead to the violation of the prohibition against using consecrated property. Therefore, if one dedicated an animal, it should be destroyed. If he dedicated produce, garments, or vessels and made from materials that decompose, he should store them until they decompose. And if he dedicated money or metal vessels, he should take them and cast them into the Dead Sea. And what constitutes destroying? He locks the door before it, and the animal dies on its own from hunger. According to the Baraita, the disposal of the animal is carried out by starving it, not by cutting its hooves. Okay, so if you're not supposed to dedicate it, but then you did dedicate it, well, all right, it's dedicated and you can't use it, so you have to leave it aside, and therefore you throw it into the Dead Sea. Or if it's an animal that you're dedicating, then you don't take care of it, you let it starve to death. So in other words, you're supposed to let it starve to death as opposed to cutting off its legs. That's the conversation here. So why teach us about cutting off legs when we already know we can let it starve to death? That's what the Gemara is arguing about here. Yes, Bess?
This was written when the Jews were in the land.
The Gemara was edited when the Jews were not in the land of Israel. The Babylonian Talmud was written when Jews were in Babylonia. They quote some rabbis who are still in the land of Israel, but most of the Babylonian stuff is from Babylonia. Yeah.
I'm questioning why it's the Dead Sea and not the Mediterranean, which would have been available to more.
Because the Dead Sea is more salt, has more salt in it, and things get decompose much quicker there. And I guess the idea for the rabbis is if you throw it in there, you'll never be able to get it out and use it again.
Well, so it's indicating that you're in Babylonia and you bought.
But they're quoting a Mishnah. So the Mishnah, right, or the Baraita are from 100 BCE to 200 CE when they're all still living in the land of Israel.
That's what I was wondering.
Okay.
They didn't expect people to start making pilgrimages to the Dead Sea.
No. So I think it would be the equivalent of throwing something into the Dead Sea. Okay, so I would think that that would mean it could mean doing something else to physically destroy something. Okay.
It's a metaphor.
Uh,
Not a metaphor,
well, not yeah. Well, I think it's
but an example.
well. Let me say it this way. The example that's coming to mind is because of what I've been involved in recently. There, one teaching about end of life is knowing the difference between doing everything you can to save somebody, and then at the same time knowing when it's time to stop and let the person die. So there's a teaching in the Gemara about somebody chopping a tree. You're hearing somebody chopping the tree while your loved one is on their deathbed. And the chopping of the tree is preventing the person from dying. So you're supposed to tell the person chopping the tree to stop chopping the tree. Okay, so that chopping of the tree is used to apply to ventilators and other medical equipment that are attached to a person, and that if someone clearly, according to the doctors, is now there's nothing else to do to save this person, we are taught from the chopping of the tree example that we are allowed to take away ventilator, feeding tube, and other devices, right? So it's not literally chopping the tree, but it's used to teach us about modern day equivalents. So the Dead Sea would be the whatever modern day equivalent to getting rid of something like throwing it in the junkyard or putting it in the shredder or something like that.
So then this instruction doesn't have the imprimatur of a commandment then.
It's a rabbinic teaching as opposed to from the Torah. So it's in the hierarchy of Jewish law. You have something that is clearly from the Torah, like observing Shabbat, and then you have something that is clearly from the rabbis. And that would be something like, well, it could be something like this, and understanding a Torah law and applying it in rabbinic times. So there's Torah law, there's rabbinic law, and if something is directly from the Torah, it's much harder to change. Something from rabbinic law is easier to change.
Okay.
Okay. So the discussion in the Gemara is about how to get rid of this animal. Do you let it starve to death or do you cut off its legs? Abaye said there, in the case of a consecrated animal, the method employed is different because cutting the animal's hooves would cause the degradation of sacrificial animals, right? Because what would happen if the temple would be rebuilt and then you have a dedicated animal that could be used in the temple and you've cut off its legs? You've destroyed consecrated property belonging to the temple. Right? So that's why you can't cut off the legs of an animal that has been consecrated for temple use. The Gemara asks, but why does the Braita require this complicated method of killing the animal? Why not simply state that he should slaughter it? Yeah, why cut off its legs? Just kill the animal. Why cause pain? If killing the animal doesn't cause pain to the animal, right? The method of kosher slaughter is supposed to be as painless as possible. Why not do that? The Gemara answers, if he were to slaughter it, someone might come to experience a mishap through it by eating the meat and thereby misusing consecrated property. But that you might mislead somebody thinking, oh, this is he's preparing meat for slaughter. I'm going to take a piece of this meat, and because it seems to be kosher, and I'll kosher and salt it, and I'll eat it. And then you are causing people to sin, and that can't be done either. So the Gemara asks,
If it's
go ahead.
a horse, nobody could eat the horse. even if
Right.
one,
So it depends. It depends why you're buying the animal in the fair. Okay, so if you're buying a beast of burden, is it okay to use a beast of burden that had previously been used for idol worship or whatever other deviant practices, or is it okay to use a beast of burden knowing that you're not going to eat it? So you're still deriving benefit from the animal as a beast of burden, like a donkey. A donkey isn't a kosher animal, or a horse, or a camel. Are you allowed to buy non-kosher animals, that is non-kosher for human consumption, from a Gentile? So we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, the Gemara asks, but why not let him render the animal a shard by mutilating it so that it's unfit to be eaten? Why not? Yes. So, right, why have to kill it or cut off its legs when you can just cause a blemish to it, which would invalidate it from being able to be eaten? Right. So it's kosher animals. There are different levels of kosher. So if on the outside the animal is okay looking, it passes inspection. Then there's also internal organs that pass inspection, and then if it's glot, then it's super duper smooth and no blemishes on the inside. So it has to have no blemishes on the outside. If it has any kind of blemish on the outside of it, it can't be used for human consumption. And so I'm not a certified shochet. I can't tell you what those blemishes are that would invalidate the animal. But there are certain blemishes that do, and perhaps you can make a blemish on this animal that, yes, would hurt the animal, but eventually would get over it and would still be able to function. Why not let him render the animal a shard by mutilating it so it's unfit to be eaten? Why is it necessary to kill it in such a drawn-out fashion by starving it to death? Abaye said that it's because the verse states, and you shall break down their altars. You shall not do so to the Lord your God. It is derived from here that one may not actively destroy any sacred item. So that you can't, once you consecrate something, you can't touch it, you can't be involved in the process of destroying it, you just ignore it. And that's by ignoring it, it's not, you've set it aside, and therefore you're not taking care of it. And if it starves, it's its fault. It's not your fault. But anything that you actively do, you can't do to it. So there's an H. Well, no, there's an L and an N on the Gistera. Apparently from the Greek gastra, referring to the lower part of a vessel bulging out like a paunch. It's used in a Talmud in reference to an earthenware vessel that is missing its handles or some other part of the vessel. Here, it's referring to any damaged or broken item. According to some of the commentaries, it means an object that is split in two, particularly when it's split down the middle. Okay. And there's a note. Okay, we don't need to get into all those details. Okay, Rava said there is a different reason a consecrated animal may not be disposed of by cutting its hooves. It's because it appears as though he is inflicting a blemish on a sacrificial animal. The Gemara asks, why does Rava say that it merely appears as though he is inflicting a blemish, when in actual fact he is inflicting a full-fledged blemish? The Gemara answers this matter that one may not inflict a blemish on a sacrificial animal applies only when the temple is standing, as the animal is fit for sacrifice and he renders it unfit. By contrast, now, when the animal is not fit for sacrifice, since there's no temple, we have no problem with it by Torah law. The only problem is that it appears as though one is inflicting a blemish on a sanctified animal. So Rava's maintaining this idea of, in post-temple times, that it's the appearance of ruining something that is consecrated, even though it's never going to be used because the temple is not standing, and you're not supposed to consecrate anyway. Okay, so this is a lengthy tangential kind of argument that the rabbis like to have, because even though the temple isn't standing, there's still things that they're talking about related to the temple. So there's discussion, there's a lot in the Mishnah about sacrifices. That is a whole section of a whole volume of Mishnah that is not in the Talmud because the rabbis did not discuss that. The temple is not standing. We don't need to discuss all the ins and outs of sacrificial law. But there are other things that are tangentially related to the temple that the rabbis do discuss, like vows and oaths and Nazirite vows, things like that, that ultimately you're supposed to end those periods of vows, oaths, and Nazirite vow by bringing a sacrifice to the temple. So there are still things that the rabbis talk about that are in theory, even though they are not existing in practice at their time. Okay. The Gemara asks, but this should be considered equivalent to one who inflicts a blemish on an animal that's already blemished, which is prohibited even though that animal is not fit for sacrifice. The Gemara answers, in the case of a blemished animal, when the temple is standing, it's prohibited to inflict a blemish upon it, as granted it itself is not fit to serve as an offering, but it is fit to make use of its monetary value. That is, another animal may be purchased with the proceeds of its sale and sacrificed in its place. This is to the exclusion of the case here when there is no temple, as the animal is not fit for its monetary value and it's not fit to serve as an offering itself. Okay, so if you live in the Galilee and you still want to consecrate an animal, but it's too much of a hardship to make it from the Galilee to the temple in Jerusalem, that's a several-day trip, you don't have enough people to take care of your land, whatever, you could still consecrate something, and the monetary equivalent is then brought to the temple precincts in Jerusalem, and exchanged there for an appropriate item to be offered to the temple. So that's how business was conducted in the land of Israel when people didn't live close to the temple and still wanted to be spiritually part of the process of giving up of yourselves, sacrificing something of your own to the temple. So if you have a blemished animal that could not be used as a sacrifice, it's still worth something. You could sell it for something. Let's say you have a blemished ox. So you can't buy an equivalent ox, but you might be able to buy a goat, and a goat could be offered in a temple too. So you sell the blemished ox for the equivalent value and consecrate that to be offered to the temple in Jerusalem. Okay.
You can't use
Yes.
that money for anything.
That money can't be used for anything else except in the temple precincts, where it'd be exchanged for whatever it is and known to and be used in your name, and you've gotten the mitzvah out of donating it.
We did this with Truma some years
Yeah, right. Okay. So another red S. So another topic. Rabbi Yonah found Rabbi Eli, who was standing at the entrance to the city of Tyre. So the city of Tyre is in Lebanon today, kind of like mid-coast on modern Lebanon. Rabbi Yonah said to him, the Baraita cited above teaches that if one bought an animal at a pagan fair, it should be destroyed. What should be done with a slave purchased at the fair? Okay, so that's an interesting question, right? Because deviant things could be done with slaves also by pagans. Rabbi Yonah elaborated, I do not raise the dilemma about a Jewish slave, as it's obvious that the master cannot cause him harm. Where it is a dilemma for me is the case of a Gentile slave. What is the halacha? Okay, so a Jewish slave, remember, a Jew owning a Jewish slave is only for the purpose of that slave to pay back a debt that otherwise the person can't afford to do. All right, so let's say say Michael stole something from me, and he's supposed to give back that object to me. But what if he doesn't have the object? If he doesn't have the object, then he still owes me the monetary equivalent of that object. And if
Or
he doesn't have, or what?
Or multiple, if it's his
Right,
dad.
depends what he steals from me. If he steals a TV, I think a non-movable item, it's one thing. If it's a movable, like an animal, you're supposed to pay back 2 or 3 times the value, whatever it is. The point is, he doesn't have the money to pay me back. So instead, he works for me. He becomes my indentured servant. So that's better how we should translate this word eved here, not slave, but rather indentured servant. Okay, so I just want to. It's important because I really don't think there's such a thing as Jewish slavery. The Jews are allowed to own non-Jews, but we're not allowed to own Jews. Okay, at least as if that's better. Okay, so what should be done? So it's a dilemma for me. Is the case of a Gentile slave? What is the halacha? Rabbi Eli said to him in response, "What is the reason that this is a dilemma for you? It's taught in a baraita with regard to the Gentiles and shepherds of small domesticated animals. We do not raise them from a pit, but we do not actively lower them into a pit either. It may be inferred from here that one may not cause the death of a Gentile slave." So you're not supposed to actively save, but you can't actively kill something either. That's what, based on this metaphor here of raising from a pit. So do not cause one may not cause the death of a Gentile slave. So here, what should be done with a slave? This is in the halacha here. If one consecrated or dedicated a Canaanite slave who accepted upon himself the mitzvot, he is redeemed, and the money for which he was exchanged is cast into the Dead Sea. This is the same as any situation where an item is consecrated when the temple is not standing. If the slave did not accept the mitzvot upon himself, one does not raise him from a pit, but one does not actively lower him there either. According to some commentaries, this means that one should not redeem him or derive benefit from him. Similarly, if one violates the prohibition and buys a slave from a merchant during a pagan fair, one does not raise or lower him. All right, so the idea is if you own a Gentile slave, then it's on the condition that the Gentile slave has to act Jewish and maybe formally convert, or at least present in public as a Jew. And if such a case, right, so there is a category in Jewish law of women, minors, and slaves, and whether they are obligated by mitzvot or not. So you can't count a Gentile slave in a minyan because a Gentile slave is not obligated by all 613 commandments. But they are, once you are doing some of them, you are obligated to do, like you're obligated, a Gentile slave has to keep kosher. But a Gentile slave can't count in a minyan. So there's a limit to how much a Gentile slave who does the mitzvot is able to fully participate in the Jewish community. Okay, so
when does the Gentile slave have to be converted? What condition?
When you buy the Gentile slave, it's on condition that the Gentile slave has to adopt Jewish practice.
So is it, but that's not conversion.
Right, it's not conversion, because if the Gentile slave converted, then they would be Jewish, and then you can't own a Jewish slave. Yes, Bess?
It sounds like contradictions. It sounds like an impossible situation.
No, so a Gentile slave has to act Jewish, but not formally convert to Judaism. So, because if the Gentile slave converted to Judaism, then you'd be owning a Jew, and you can't own a Jew. Ben, and then Michael.
Heard the idea that a Gentile slave would then be obligated to the negative mitzvot, not the positive mitzvot. So in this case, would it be a Gentile slave who takes on the negative, but they still haven't taken on the positive? So that's how they haven't converted, because they haven't fully taken it on. They're just doing the negative.
Right. So
And then if you're in the public
I think
sphere,
that a Gentile slave is also supposed to pray. So praying is a positive mitzvah. It's just that a Gentile slave can't count in a minyan. So but I'd have to look into it more, Ben. I don't think it's just about the negative mitzvot. I think there are some positive ones too that the Gentile slave is supposed to do.
so that if such a slave converts, if such a slave takes on these mitzvot and then is freed, do they no longer have to take on the mitzvot?
Right.
Are they obligated those mitzvot,
Right.
but
So
no
that
more?
right. If a Gentile slave buys his or her freedom, the Gentile right. So the Gentile slave would no longer be, because they haven't converted. They're not Jewish. There's no obligation for them to still be Jewish. Right. Yeah, Michael.
Oh, I just remember the quote about Shabbos, that it extends to you and to your animals and to the slaves
Right.
who are with you.
Right.
So they get the benefits of all of that.
That's right. That's right. They're observing Shabbos too. But I wonder, are they allowed to cook for you on Shabbos, which therefore then is working? So I don't know. I don't know how it all plays out. I'm not up on all the laws of slavery or indentured servitude. Okay, but let's continue here. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zerah, the second Braita cited above teaches that one may go to a pagan fair and buy from the Gentiles animals, slaves, and maidservants. Does the Braita mean that one may buy a Jewish slave, or perhaps is it teaching that one may buy even a Gentile slave? Rabbi Zerah said to him, it stands to reason that the Braita means specifically a Jewish slave, as if it's referring to a Gentile slave, what is the reason that it is necessary for the sages to permit this purchase? When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says it is permitted to purchase even a Gentile slave because he brings him under the wings of the divine presence, by having him undergo the process of conversion when he becomes the slave of a Jew. So according to Reish Lakish, yes, when you buy a Gentile slave, you're making the Gentile having to convert to Judaism. I wonder then if that means that a male Gentile slave has to be circumcised. I guess it does. So Rav Ashi said, but with regard to the permission to buy an animal, what is there about this purchase that one can be said to bring the animal under the wings of the divine presence? Rather, the reason it is permitted is because through this purchase, the Jew reduces the possessions of the Gentile. And here too, as he reduces the Gentile's property by purchasing the slave, it is permitted. So here's another aspect of doing business with Gentiles is raising. It's not just about the object itself and whether the object being an object or an animal or a person. It's not about whether the object was used for idolatrous purposes. It's all about the bigger concept of what is our status in the world versus the Gentile status in the world. And perhaps our goal in being Jewish is to ensure that Gentiles are diminished. All right, so this is kind of, I wouldn't say a militant perspective, but it's a pretty fundamentalist perspective about what it means to be Jewish. I'm Jewish. Everybody else who is not Jewish is here for my pleasure, and I'm supposed to do everything I can to ensure that the Gentile is diminished in property and in power. And so there are some in the Jewish community today who could still have that attitude towards the Gentile, that it's looking down upon them, and it is an idea that our fundamental purpose as a Jew, one of the fundamental purposes of the Jew, is to ensure our primacy in the world and the degradation of the Gentile. Ben.
As an economist, I gotta wonder, like, isn't there something wrong with this reasoning? Because obviously, the Gentile who sold you is better off. So you're making the Gentile better off. It has to be the transaction benefits Gentile. Even if they're going to otherwise sell, you gave the best offer. Surely you're benefiting Gentile material.
But you are diminishing how much property the Gentile has left to sell.
No.
So that's what this is. And here too, as he reduces the Gentile's property by purchasing the slave, it is permitted, right? It's one less slave that the Gentile has. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying this is the reasoning of Rav Ashi, who is saying here that this is part of the idea. If you buy things from the Gentiles, then that's less. So in other words, let's buy up Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett because they're Gentiles, and if we buy more stuff from them, then you're diminishing how much they have, and that's better for us as Jews to see the wealth of the non-Jew diminished.
But they'd have more money.
No.
But what?
They'd have more money.
They'd have more money. Yeah, okay, maybe. Yes, I didn't say I agreed with this. I'm just explaining the reasoning behind it. And I'm not even sure that the reasoning, as you're pointing out, the reasoning is not good because they have.
Is the
What?
reasoning, that it's not about making them worse off, it's about diminishing the tangible profit they have. That it's better than to just have cash than to have something that people can see.
So I didn't catch everything there that you said, Ben. It wasn't coming through clearly.
Sorry, I'm on the open. Is there a sense in which it's better? It's fine that they could be better off, but the argument is they should not be visibly better off. That if they have money, it's not apparent.
It's possible. That is possible, and I think there's an attitude in the rabbis that money isn't what it is now. Like it wasn't seen so tangible as it, right? We had discussed this a couple of years ago in the Gemara class about coins and such. It wasn't a standard sense of showing wealth as opposed to property. How many animals you had, the size of your flocks, size of your house. That's more tangible. So by diminishing the amount of property, you're in a way diminishing the so-called wealth or the outer appearances of wealth of a Gentile.
I have to agree with Ben. I think I think the rabbis were smart enough to understand that if you buy something from someone, that just gives them the ability to go out and replace it.
Yeah.
So I think that they don't pick up on this with any further discussion.
Right.
So I think that Talmud is saying to Rabbi Yashi, all right, fine, that's your opinion, but we're not gonna. It doesn't merit any further discussion because we think you're crazy.
Well, I don't know.
I think they're smart enough to know.
Yeah.
That
So
this doesn't
okay.
occur.
So clearly the economics behind this doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I think that the religious element of this is a component to this discussion. What are the issues involved in doing business with a non-Jew? Is it narrowly focused on whether the object or the proceeds of business directly goes to idol worship? Or is it a bigger religious idea that Jews are better than Gentiles and that we don't want to contaminate ourselves in business with them at all? And even more, we want to show that we are better than them. And anything we can do then in our relations in which we will end up on top is better. So I think it's fascinating to me to see the nuances at play here from the very narrow object being used for idol worship to the very broad idea: what's the Jew's place in the world vis-a-vis the pagan? All
I
right.
see an idea here of Kiddush Hashem in that if you buy the slave from the Gentile and you have the slave as a Jew, you're going to treat the slave better than a non-Jew would.
Yes.
If people see that, then this is Kiddush Hashem.
Yes.
It's fine.
There's that.
It's not necessarily making the Gentile owner worse off. It's that it's Kiddush Hashem.
I think that's fair to say, Ben, that you by buying a slave from a Gentile and bringing the slave into a Jewish home, you are raising. That's another aspect of Ma'alin Bakodesh. You're raising something in holiness status. All right, let's see if we can finish these two paragraphs today before we end. The Gemara relates: Rabbi Yaakov bought sandals, and Rabbi Yirmiyah bought bread at a pagan fair. One said to the other, "Orphan, that is, one with no guide, would your teacher act in this manner?" The other likewise said to him, "Orphan, would your teacher act in this manner?" The Gemara explains, actually both purchased these items from a homeowner, that is a private individual, and each one thought that the other had purchased his item from a merchant. As Rabbi Abba, son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, says, the sages taught that it is prohibited to buy from a Gentile at a pagan fair only in the case of one who buys from a merchant, as a tax is taken from him and used for the benefit of idol worship. But with regard to one who buys from a homeowner, when a tax is not taken from him, it is permitted to make the purchase. So back to this idea, and here's an example of rabbis buying sandals and bread from a pagan. But if it's a pagan homeowner, well, first of all, you have to trust that the bread is kosher, and then also that the sandals from the homeowner, no tax, nothing about it could be related to idol worship. Rabbi Abba, son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, says, if Rabbi Yochanan had been present at this time and age in a place where the tax is taken from all sales, including those conducted with private individuals, he would have prohibited buying items even from a homeowner. The Gemara asks, but if so, how did these sages, Yaakov and Yirmiyah, purchase items at the fair? The Gemara answers, they purchased the items from a homeowner who sells solely on a temporary basis. Right, so meaning, right, he's not a regular merchant, so that he's not subject to giving the tax. Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll continue. So next week, there's no Hebrew school. It's Martin Luther King weekend, but I think we can still meet next Sunday. So we'll be meeting for the next few Sundays. I won't have any Sundays off from what I can see from my schedule now. So we'll see you all next Sunday. Have a good rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
And a good week.
Yes.
Have a good week, all.
You'll be
You too.
recording. You'll be recording tomorrow.
Yes, I will be. Yep. Safe
Bye-bye.
travels.